Okay guys, I'm going to do another rundown of a pump comparison because I got some questions pertaining to my claim that this pump is the best pump you can buy for a wet sump system on an LS motor. And so what we have is we have the M365 and next to it we have the 10296. This is the tried and true high volume pump, comes with the high pressure relief spring. One thing I'll note is some people are looking at the 10296 versus the 10295. In my opinion, the 10295 is Melling's high pressure pump. It will not do anything to increase the oil pressure in your LS motor for the most part. The only thing that they do is it basically has standard gears in it, the 10295. And so the thickness, how they increase the volume on a 10296 is they increase the thickness of the gear. And so what that does is it increases the volume. And so when you make the gear thicker, you basically take this, this space and you make it greater. And so how the pumps work is you start off with, you see an increase in the cavity space and it maximizes right at the pickup area. And then basically as it spins, you notice that that space will disappear. And so, the space disappears and basically the pump will force the oil now through the outlet, and that goes into the engine block. And then right here, that part right there is the oil bypass. And so that's how the pressure is limited up top, is there's a piston in there that's backed up by a spring. And so it takes a certain amount of pressure to crack that valve. And then basically it just bypasses internally. And so when you hear about an LS pump failure, it's very uncommon to see an actual failure with the pump mechanism. What you typically find is that something has gotten into the oil pressure relief system, and say somebody did a wide open pull, the piston got stuck. Some debris got in there, some contamination, and the piston could not restore itself to the closed position. And so now the pump is internally bypassing oil. Up top in the high RPMs, that's okay because the volume of the pump is so high that you'll still have good oil pressure. But when the RPMs drop back down to idle and low level, the bypass is basically limiting the output of the pump and therefore a reduction in pressure at the engine level. Now let's move over to this pump. And so this pump also shares the same thickness in terms of the gears, but this M365 achieves 30% over a standard LS pump in terms of the volume. How does it do that? Well, it has different gears. And so if you take a look at this pump and you look at the cavity created between the two gears and you compare it to this pump, it's a dramatic difference, So you take a look at that and then take a look at that. See, see those two? And so this pump achieves greater oil flow. And so that's the oil flow is actually what increases pressure. You do not get an increase in pressure by increasing the tension in the spring. The reason why is because that spring has no influence on the output of the pump at most of the, RPM range. And so at idle, where your oil pressure is going to be lower than high RPM, the spring has no influence. And so you can weld the bypass closed and it will not increase the oil pressure and low RPMs because the bypass is completely inactive. In fact, the effect of having a bypass open at low RPM would be no oil pressure, because it's basically just recycling oil inside the pump. The other thing that made the 10296 a desirable pump is that in testing, it did not show a decrease in oil flow in the upper RPM range. So typically, a big knock against the wet sump LS oiling system is that in the upper RPM range, this configuration loses efficiency where it no longer can move oil effectively. And so as the RPMs increase, say past 6,500, on most standard pumps like an LS2, LS1, LS6 truck pump, you actually would experience a decrease in oil flow. And so typically you guys know that as RPMs go up, you see an increase in oil pressure. The oil pressure increase is strictly a result of, the oil pump spinning faster, putting out more oil and forcing that oil through the motor. And the motor, all the bearing clearances and crevices and passages end up being a restriction on flow that results in pressure against the pump and pressure in the oiling circuit. Well, that's how we increase the pressure, is we just force more volume through the same space. And so that's why a high volume pump is the only way to see a pressure increase. And the reasons for something like that is like when you have race engines built like we do with CPR motors, CPR engines in Gardena, they're going to put in bigger bearing clearances for those race engines. And a higher volume pump will restore oil pressure. Like if you put a standard volume pump in a motor with big bearing clearances, you would expect to see a decrease in the oil pressure. Well, the reason why is that the larger spaces between the moving parts, between the rod bearing and the crankshaft journals, the main bearings and the main journals, that's where the oil is able to seep out, through the oiling system. And so that basically bleeds off pressure, and so these pumps help maintain, fantastic oil pressure. And you will see a dramatic increase in oil pressure on a tight clearance standard LS motor. And so I like these pumps because sometimes people come in for cam swaps and they've got a lot of mileage. And so their motor's kind of loosened up a little bit. And so this helps bring the oil pressure way back up. And not only that, it'll probably exceed what it used to be brand new, by a pretty wide margin. And so now moving to this pump, much like the 10296 pump, this pump did not demonstrate the same cavitation that you experience with standard LS pumps. And so you don't see a decrease in oil volume as a function of RPM at any point during the testing. And so the main difference between this pump and this pump is that the 10296 plateaus. And so it goes up, 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 and then it reaches a certain threshold RPM where it loses efficiency and the output of the pump no longer increases with RPM. It doesn't decrease. And so it does have an advantage over an LS6 or other pumps, but it doesn't increase. And so it does lose efficiency at some point, whereas this one does not. And so for whatever reason, with the gear design, the added volume, whatnot, this pump right here produces steady, rock solid oil flow in the very upper RPM range. And so when you look at the Turbo Corvette motor, we put an improved racing baffle kit in the pan to make sure that the oil pickup tube is always, supplied with oil. We put a custom crank scraper, which will help shear oil off of the rotating assembly and free up power, but also more importantly, restore it to the oil pan quicker. And so keeping the oil pan full, so the oil supply is improved, and then adding a pump that has more upper RPM flow and stability, basically helps, cover some of the distance between converting to a dry sump system. Is it as good as a dry sump setup? I would have to say probably not, no. But, for budget builds, for, cars that want to extend the RPM range safely, and not have to deal with the expense of converting to a dry sump system, this is a wonderful alternative. This is a great pump. And the best part of this pump is that it is typically a lot cheaper than the aftermarket one, simply from a marketing standpoint. And if you actually looked, these pumps have the exact same cover. They're virtually undistinguishable. This does have a different casting, but it's very, very similar. In fact, I could interchange the gears And, all, we'd basically be doing is reducing the efficiency of the one M365 in doing so, but pumps are virtually identical, except this one is better. And so what are we going to do? My plan is a little business maneuver. I want to find additional ways to generate revenue for my personal business. You guys have seen me try things like I want to introduce a 2650 to market, and I'm always eager to do things and try things, and I want to hit a home run. And so this is a simple thing. I've got a couple of these pumps, and so I'm going to test something out. I'm going to port one of them, and then I'm going to take the other and have it digitized so I can have a CNC program where I can reliably reproduce a well-ported pump and offer it to people brand new, come in the same box, but it'll be taken apart, professionally CNC ported, put back together, torqued to spec, clean, ready to run. Another thing that I'll offer is micro polishing cryogenic treatment for the gear set. It's not that these are known for failure, but the micro polishing would definitely reduce friction. It would also, with the cryogenic treatment, it would make the gears a little more impervious to, shearing forces and damage from possible debris or anything. So the gears would be harder and more wear resistance. And so the service life of the oil pump would be increased. The heat dissipation of the gears would be improved. And then it might even be possible to look at micro polishing the internals of the pump body as well as the cover. And so the pump would have a dramatic reduction in friction. We could even consider anodizing this for a custom look, just so it's kind of like our own brand. But, we may not, we don't find everything like that necessary, because we just want to offer an affordable pump that would be priced somewhere in the range of this one, maybe a little more for the CNC version, but, it might be a worthwhile consideration. This is, to me, the gold standard. I don't install these anymore simply because I have these. I can get these and, use them. And so that's the plan. Today I'm going to be working on porting this one, and then we'll get it digitized, and then we'll have the first CNC version cut. And I don't know what car we'll put it in. Maybe it goes into the Fox body build. I think that might be the case. But we're here at my home garage, which I'm setting up to be my second workstation. I've got a lot of work that I need to do that doesn't require a lift, engine stuff, long blocking, things like that. And so I'm going to be using this more for some of the custom stuff. And, so I'll be here making more videos and things like that. But that's the explanation of the pumps. Hopefully you guys find that information valuable. You can see there the big difference in terms of the volume created by the gears. And this is just the latest and greatest made by Melling, just not marketed. I don't know why. They might have the same data, but they've had really rock steady sales of this particular pump, and maybe they just didn't want to infringe on that market, and so this pump's more seen as like a replacement for DOD motors, for, motors with variable cam timing, LSA engine applications, stuff that have like piston oil squirters, things that necessitate an additional volume to maintain appropriate levels of oil pressure. And so we take advantage of this pump, and, like Frank's Red Hot sauce, we put that shit in everything. So that's my pump of choice for all my budget-friendly customers. I haven't really gotten any guys that need 2,000 horsepower yet, but I'm working my way up the ladder. I want to be building incredible machines, and I'm trying to just showcase my skills and versatility within the market I currently exist, with the hopes of advancing. So that's my drive, and hopefully shortly, I'll have my GTO twin turbo kits that'll come online. Still working on that. And then I'll offer for everybody everywhere in the world, CNC ported M365 pump fitted with the Melling Red high pressure relief spring. So in review, best pump, really good pump. 10295 pump is basically a bone stock factory oil pump. Doesn't represent an upgrade other than the name Melling, which is a good name. But the high pressure relief springs put into a standard volume pump don't do anything to influence your oil pressure during the majority of the RPM range. It only works at the very, very peak up top. And so don't expect to see any change in oil pressure if you buy a standard volume high pressure pump. You need an increase in the oil volume in order to actually see an increase in your pressure at idle and throughout the mid-range and every increment of the RPM band. And so hopefully that information is useful. That's a little bit of an inside comparison of these two offerings. And like I said, this is kind of where I like to distinguish myself. I want to put the best in your motors. That's why I love using Cam Motion cams that offer billet cores, Johnson lifters. Some of them have axle oiling. And so even for basic cam swaps, we like to do things that really custom tailor the performance. We're going to be doing, a 5.3 makeover here in the garage with a truck cam, some CNC ported heads, the oiling system upgrades, and it's in a badass work truck. The guy tows, he has a badass, hot rod car, Fox Body LS1, but we're going to fix the car with low oil pressure by replacing the engine, but we're going to do a bunch of modifications and then get it over to high rev tuning and see what kind of power it makes with the stock exhaust, with a basic high torque truck cam, a little added compression, flex fuel, and some CNC port work. And so that'll be real interesting. I probably would venture to guess the numbers on our simple combo would probably beat out a lot of you guys with your Texas Speed thumper cams and open exhaust. And so we're all about functional power that would actually improve the performance of the vehicle, and so when you give up a bunch of bottom end power and you don't have the head porting, you don't have the supporting thought out things like, customizing or raising the compression to augment the torque and, increase the dynamic compression on a motor that you change the cam, there's probably a lot of guys out there with cam trucks that are actually slower than if they were stock, so you got to think about the way you're doing your combinations or have somebody like me that can think for you. And I love to do that. I love to be creative, to help people have the best that they can afford. It's all about working creatively within a budget. That's why a lot of times people ask me, what's the price for this? What's the price for that? Well, look, dude, I don't have a menu like McDonald's. It's really, every build is different, the different nuances. And so there's a price range. And so if you give me a budget, I can give you back some feedback on what's available. And so that's kind of the way I do it. That might be a little different. I mean, I can tell you, generally $2,500 will get your complete cam swap on a LS truck or vehicle. Probably going to be over $3,000 on a LT or a Hemi, just based on the labor and also the cost of the parts. Hemis are more expensive. Lifters, things like that cost more money. 4 times as much in many cases as an LS, in terms of like the cost of a lifter. So anyway, back to the pumps. Hopefully this was useful. Put it in my IG story and see if it could actually upload. I'll probably break this down into 2 segments. So if you're hearing this, obviously you're on the second video.